Okay, we are ready to start with Joshua part 2 of 3. And again, this is a whole big emphasis on the wave sheaf in Canaan. There's some exciting things that are happening here in this particular study. In fact, as we said before, it is a teaching from Joshua about 1451. This was just after Moses died, and they went into the land of Canaan. And we have here a skeleton. And I bet you're just wondering what in the world that skeleton is doing on the slide with wave sheaf. Well, you're going to find out. And I hope that after this particular part 2 teaching, that wave sheaf is going to just mean something totally different to you forever after. And I hope you share it with others. And like we said, in part 2, we're going to try to figure out this first Sabbath of unleavened bread, being on Abib 15, along with wave sheaf, which takes priority? Which one is it? And which feast is actually the backbone of our salvation? So we're going to see exactly what's going to happen. And this is fasten your seatbelt. This is really, really exciting. So what we know already is that Joshua's statements have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that Passover absolutely was on the weekly Sabbath. It was Abib 14 that year on the Sabbath day. So today we're going to be looking at this unleavened bread Sabbath on Abib 15 in this particular study. And then next time we're going to see about this wave sheaf on the 15th, or not on the 16th in part 3. Like, how does that work? So we'll be doing some charts in part number 3. But you know what? There is so much more. There's always more, isn't it? The intrigue, I'm going to call it the intrigue of part 2. The intrigue of Joshua in part 2 is that he has got a whole lot more meaning about the wave sheaf. And we were so excited to discover this. So there's going to be a thorough examination of calendars in conflict after we do the skeleton part of the study. We're going to look at, I think it's five conflicts of other calendars and what's happening, just so that you can see, what the differences are and whatnot. Yes, the question is, which festival actually secures first place? Wave sheaf or the unleavened bread Sabbath? And we already said that every single feast and festival is of utmost importance. It doesn't matter if it's an annual Sabbath or not, they're all very important. And Joshua definitely brought forth those 2 festivals of the high Sabbath of unleavened bread and the wave sheaf festival. And our other question was in part 1, will Joshua give priority to one of them? And will he make the right choice? And does it matter? It really is a good question if it matters or not. So Tim, you're going to be sharing this part of the study with us. You'll be doing a lot of slides, and we're just anxious to see what you have to show us.
I'm just as anxious to do the work. I love this portion of the study. I absolutely love it. And I just want to mention again, this is only a small portion of our Joshua studies. If you want more detail, there's at least 5 more studies specifically on detail that go into, or specifically on the wave sheaf in Joshua, that go into great detail of this. So if you're left hanging a little bit with this one, there's lots more for you. Okay, let's go. The wave sheaf grain holds the clues, the grain. To understand the importance of wave sheaf and first fruit, it is first helpful to investigate the grain in the land of Canaan. The grain holds clues to help understand how wave sheaf was fulfilled in Yahusha's life. This is the first recorded time of Israel celebrating the full spring festival. Remember, there is no scriptural account for the celebration of the wave sheaf festival in the wilderness. Yahuwah had promised the Israelites the grain of the land would be ready for harvest upon entering the land of Canaan. And if you read Deuteronomy 6:10-11 and Joshua 24:13, you'll see that concept quite clearly. However, all grain Note that word all, it's emphasized for a purpose. All grain, whether old or new, wheat or barley, was declared off limits to eat or to use for personal purposes like preparing unleavened bread for Passover until, and I should have that word until bouncing across your screen, until after the wave sheaf ceremony had been celebrated. We see that in Leviticus 23:14. Until, yes. Special instructions for wave sheaf. There is one command that is extremely significant and recorded twice. The terms until and on this same day are very important to understand. These are vital, as you're going to see. Joshua 5:11 and Leviticus 23:14 agree. Joshua 5:11, and they ate. Please notice those two words, they ate. This is part of your calendar language. They ate of the stored grain of the land on the morrow after the Passover, unleavened bread and roasted grain. When? On this same day. This same day. That has to do with that special word that I mentioned earlier. Joshua followed the Torah command. What was that command? Leviticus 23:14. And you do not eat. Yes, do not eat. What weren't they supposed to eat? Just a loaf of bread? What does it say here? Look for 3 categories of grain. And you do not eat bread. Number 2, roasted grain. Number 3, fresh grain. There is 3 categories of eating the grain of the land. That is a blanket coverage. They were not to touch or eat that grain of any kind until, what does until mean? Up until that point. When you get to this certain point, there is a statute of limitations here. I start again. And you do not eat bread or roasted grain or fresh grain until the etzem. Is that what it says? We read in our scriptures the same day, but the word there for same is etzem, and we're going to dig into that. Until the same day that you have done what? That you have brought an offering to your Elohim. Would that be the wave sheaf offering? It is a law forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. Until the same day. That self same day. And they did eat. Note that. And they did eat. Didn't we have a command that they were not to eat until this wave sheaf or until this offering had been completed? And yet here in the scriptures, Joshua 5:11, it says, and they did eat. So we know that something had been performed. What was it? And they did eat of the old corn or the grain of the land on the morrow after the Passover, unleavened cakes and parched corn in the self same day. The self same day, self same. What is that word in Hebrew? We see it as H6106, etzem, and it is from H6105, a bone. Reference this skeleton, a bone. By extension, the body. Who is the body? Figuratively, the substance. Now, the word substance has an incredible depth of meaning behind it. The substance. The KJV uses it as bone, body, life, and strength. So let's have a look at this word. Let's go through it and see how it relates to why we are here today on this same day. The primary point we need to pay attention to in the wave sheaf ceremony of these first fruits are the words until the self-same day, translated from the Hebrew words etzem ze. The main word meanings of etzem are firmness, solidity, and bone, as in a basic skeletal structure, and essence and substance. Essence gets right down to the base element, as does substance. So what is the base element of the wave sheaf day? All definitions link the wave sheaf first fruits ceremony to the self-same day. And please note, day of the week, not date of the month. And there is a calendar system out there that declares the date of the month instead of the day. That is not what Scripture says. Scripture defines the self-same day. It does not say date upon which the antitype is to be fulfilled. So please be careful when reading this scripture. Day, not date. What about Yahusha's life? We have often concentrated on the death of Yahusha, and that is what we commemorated yesterday. His crucifixion, where he voluntarily gave his life on the tree. That is what we commemorated. Might we submit a portion of our thoughts to Yahusha's victory of life over death? Life. He lives. He lives, Yahusha lives today. He walks with me and talks with me along life's narrow way. He lives, salvation to impart. You get the idea. I'm not a singer, but he lives.
Hallelujah.
Yes. After Yahusha died, what single event that is commanded to be observed yearly was actually signed, sealed, and forever etched into our salvation for eternity? What event was that? Will this identify our Mashiach, or will we pass over it? What about Mashiach's offering of life that was accepted? What day was that offering accepted? What morning twilight was it accepted on? Are we here today for that very reason? Yahusha's death would have no meaning had he not presented himself. We see that in Exodus 23, 16 and 17, if he had not presented himself before Yahuwah. It was here that Yahusha's sacrifice was accepted as perfection. If it was not as perfection, we would not have the option of salvation. Another Melchizedek covenant connection and fulfillment, because he is our Kohen HaGadol in the Melchizedek covenant. What is contained in this life support system? Leviticus 23:14. Until etzem, the very same day, not date. Until etzem, when the wave sheaf or first fruit presentation and the acceptance was fulfilled before Yahuwah within the Melchizedek covenant. This event, which has the word etzem linked directly to it, this event of the wave sheaf presentation, when Yahusha presented himself as the ultimate sacrifice, has the embodiment and it is the skeletal bone structure, which was and still is the quintessential substance and essence of our salvation. That definition of etzem is bone. This is the bone structure. It is the framework of Yahuwah's feasts. What connects the skeletal bone concept to Yahusha's life support system? Remember, this is the life system, Yahusha's nervous center. He is what controls everything. Yahusha alone is salvation's administration center for life. Without him, we have nothing. This factor was finalized through Yahuwah's acceptance of Yahusha, the first fruit. When? On the festival of the wave sheaf. Now I ask you, why is it that we have gone through so many years at different feasts of Passover unleavened bread and never heard anything of wave sheaf? Why has this been ignored? Why? Is it because people do not understand the etzem, the bone structure of Yahusha presenting himself to Yahuwah for acceptance? We need to understand this. We need to celebrate this wave sheaf ceremony. Yahusha's skeletal bone distribution system has a purpose. The etzem bone spinal cord nervous support structure. Now, what do I reference that for? Why do I say the central nervous support structure? I reference the wave sheaf and the first fruit festival. These are the feasts of Yahuwah. This identifies his covenant calendar with absolute certainty. This bone structure, this base foundation of the calendar supports our salvation. Is it important? Why have we ignored wave sheaf up until this point? Why is it that we do not know about this? Have we ignored wave sheaf? Is it because we do not understand the etzem, that this is the base foundation of the feasts? This aligns calendar to the covenant as written and displayed by when Moshe brought the Hebrew nation out of Egypt. It is through Joshua, which conveys the vital salvational substance, the yearly timing, and Mashiach character identification. Who does it identify it to? Wave sheaf day identifies Yahusha to us. How? Because there is another calendar that would like to have the wave sheaf outside of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But when we read the scripture, we understand that Yahusha presented himself to Yahuwah on the first cycle after the seventh-day Sabbath, on the fourth day after his crucifixion. Remember, 3 days and 3 nights? And then when he arose, it was the next morning. It was the Shabbat morning when he talked to Mary at the tomb and he said, "Do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father." Yahuwah accepted Yahusha, and that identifies exactly who our Mashiach is with absolute certainty. Yahusha's etzem, the bone notification system for the body of Yahusha. This identifies the essence of our salvation through Yahusha's sacrificial acceptance. When was it? On none other than the first cycle after the seventh-day Sabbath. And the scripture makes sure that we understand that it was within the Feast of Unleavened Bread. What does that do to the Enoch calendar? That declares the Enoch calendar as false because it's not scriptural. And yet we have been accused of being the adapted Enoch calendar. Sorry, we are not the adapted Enoch calendar. We follow scripture. and Scripture alone. This ultimate bone distribution system, which is the Etzem, directs us to the wave sheaf as the backbone. Why the backbone? If Yahusha had not been accepted as the ultimate sacrifice on that day, you would not have salvation, and neither would I. Is this a base foundation? Is this the backbone of our salvation? I say it is. It's the base foundation of Yahusha's plan to bring salvation to his body of people. Yahusha, by dying, then observing the wave sheaf, presented himself to Yahuwah as the first fruit of victory over death. Yahuwah accepted Yahusha's monumental sacrifice. He was the perfect lamb, and it was fulfilled, and it was accepted as it should have been. That acceptance is the substance and essence of the plan for our salvation. Is it any wonder that word etzem is placed directly in the verse with the wave sheaf? It is the substance and essence of our salvation. Today, the wave sheaf is Yahuwah's calendar. It is the timing that we need to understand so clearly.
Wave sheaf as our high priest. All feasts and festivals, they're types that have their complete fulfillment in our Messiah as the highest Melchizedek priest. And through that premier type of the wave sheaf festival, the first harvest purposely confirmed the standard for Yahusha as the antitype on his wave sheaf presentation to be the principal first fruit. And we saw that this first happened in Canaan. It was a prophecy that was supposed to be fulfilled during the week of the crucifixion. This event, it looked forward to the time when Yahusha would ascend to receive Yahuwah's announcement of whether or not his blood sacrifice fully paid the requirements of our death penalty. The actual cycle of the week where the wave sheaf type was truly fulfilled by the antitype was on the next first cycle of the week, or the Sunday after the crucifixion. So the timing of the resurrection and the ascension, we don't want to confuse these two facts because they're very, very different. Yahusha's resurrection was on the weekly Sabbath. It was on a Sabbath, not a Sunday. And Yahusha's ascension was perfectly timed so that his presence was before Yahuwah as the earthly wave sheaf was waved heavenward at the early dawn hours of the next day, which would have been the first cycle or Sunday. And there's a lot of information in the Wednesday crucifixion studies. So let's just chart the resurrection and the ascension. We need to take a look at this just for those that are new. This is Yahusha's Passover. This is not Joshua's. Yahusha's Passover was on the midst of the week. His resurrection was on the weekly Sabbath. And then the next morning was the wave sheaf. These two very important events did not occur on the same day. There's a lot of people that think that the resurrection and the ascension were the same thing, but they are not. They're quite a few hours apart. So if the wave sheaf is not observed at the exact correct time, there's quite a few problems that will arise. Which was honored first on Abib 15, wave sheaf or the unleavened bread? Joshua's very first honor was applied to the wave sheaf festival event, representing Yahusha's ascension during the early pre-sunrise hours of this day. That's where the emphasis is from Joshua. And then Joshua's second honor was bestowed upon the festival of the first Sabbath of unleavened bread. And that was a high Sabbath. We all know that. But guess what? Everything else on Abib 15 pales in comparison to the wave sheaf. And Tim now has got a few things to show us about a very important scripture in 1 Corinthians 15:20.
First honor, wave sheaf and first fruits. After the wave sheaf offering on the pre-sunrise hour, The people were released from the command to refrain from eating the yield of the land. But now is Yahusha risen from the dead and become the first fruits of them that slept. The significance of this wave sheaf prophecy of 1500 plus years, and that is the presentation of the harvest to Yahuwah for acceptance, this prophecy should draw full attention to the skeletal bone structure of the plan of salvation through Yahuwah's feasts and festivals. Is the timing important here? Yes, it is very important. Notice this little X that come up here, and it has covered the S on first fruit. We're going to look at this a little bit closer. Is that supposed to be plural or singular? But now is Yahusha risen from the dead and become the first fruits of them that slept. Is that supposed to be plural? Or is Yahusha one? Why is that pluralized? This is just a little bunny trail I'd like to point out here, just something we need to pay attention to. And we're going to look at this from the Interlinear Scripture Analyzer. If we look at the word there, it is first fruit. That is in singular. It is not plural. So this actually should be Yahusha is risen from the dead and has become the first fruit of them that slept. That is the victory over death, life over death. And if we look down again in chapter 15, verse 23, we see once again, first fruit is singular. It is not plural. Just a little something to point out here. It is a part of the interesting stuff we need to know for calendar. Some Kodesh intricacies. The Kohen HaGadol, or high priest, was the only identity approved and accepted, according to Torah, to present the wave sheaf before Yahuwah. Yahusha, as the Kohen HaGadol, presented the wave sheaf before Yahuwah according to Leviticus 23, 10 and 11. Yahusha first presented himself as the wave sheaf. He was the Kohen HaGadol at that time. Number 4, Yahusha's presentation consisted of the first cutting of himself. That word first cutting is quite important to understand also. He is the first cutting of himself, the first fruit, and his victory or power over death, Leviticus 23:10. Remember, Yahusha has the power to lay down his life and take it up again, John 10:17-18. Note, Hebraically, the word fruit is not seen in Leviticus 23 as wave sheaf. And next, they're going to see 2 applications to be examined here. Etzem. This is that word again. Etzem. Salvation's skeletal structure. Yahusha, the Melech Zedek, King of Righteousness, is those words. And here's the first of 2 applications. Number 1, Yahusha, the first fruit. Yahusha, the wave sheaf. Number 3, Yahusha, the Kohen HaGadol. And Yahusha, the one who sends the Ruach HaKodesh. This is your etzem, your base bone structure of salvation, and it all points back to Yahusha, each and every one. Here we're going to look at the second of the 2 applications. Yahusha, the Kohen HaGadol, or the high priest, waves his sheaf contribution before Yahuwah. What is that contribution? This wave sheaf consisted, in plurality, many individual stalks of wheat. What was that wave sheaf that Yahusha presented before Yahuwah? after he presented himself. Yahusha presented each individual stalk of wheat within the sheaf, or the people raised at the earthquake. We see that in Matthew 27:52. He presented these people as his first fruit offering to Yahuwah. Revelation 5:12. Worthy is the Lamb that was slain. Yahusha, the first fruit, the one and only. But now, Mashiach has been raised from the dead and has become the first fruit of those having fallen asleep. And we see that so clearly in 1 Corinthians 15:20. There are scripture versions that have correct wording to be in alignment with the Torah commands. We need to look for them. Yahusha became the premier first fruit and the principal wave sheaf. He is the one that offered his personal first fruits as one wave sheaf once and for all. He is our Mashiach, and we are identified, or he is identified to us if we only read the words of the scriptures carefully.
Thank you, Tim. We're going to learn more about the wave sheaf after we're considering some events on Abib 16, because the question is, what? Is there no more manna? No more manna on Abib 16. This is the last chart out of our 7, and indeed there's going to be a change of diet in the land of milk and honey. Just to review here, that we had Passover on the Sabbath, and Passover was performed at even according to the instructions in the Torah by Moses. And then on Abib 15, we had Joshua 5:11, where they celebrated the wave sheaf festival for the unleavened bread that they ate. The stored grain of the land could not be touched until the morrow after the Passover, but they had to use that grain in the waving of the wave sheaf before they could even touch it. So just a little bit of a review here in Leviticus 23:11, and he shall wave the sheaf before Yahuwah for your acceptance. On the morrow after the Sabbath, the priest waves it. And in Leviticus 23:14, you do not eat bread or roasted grain or fresh grain until the same day that you have brought your offering to your Elohim. And that was to be a law forever. So after the wave sheaf was waved, then they were allowed to touch the grain. And that's where Joshua 5:12 comes in really handy. It says, and the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten of the old corn of the land. Neither had the children of Israel manna anymore, but they did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. And I bet that was a really happy day. Now, when you think about Enoch, and they didn't have any wave sheaf until the 26th. I wonder what happens. We're going to take a look at that. But anyway, this is very, very clear. And if we just read the literal words in the scriptures, we usually can figure it out without any problem. So as far as we're concerned, Joshua has definitely confirmed that wave sheaf is on Abib 15 in his calendar year. That means that wave sheaf is not married to the date of Abib 16. And I'd like you to note that when wave sheaf is permanently placed and observed on Abib 16, it is always a floating festival, as this date's going to float through every cycle of the week in all the 7 years. It will only occur on the first cycle of the week about once every 6 or 7 years. And there's 3 major problems with a floating wave sheaf that is married to Abib 16. Number 1, wave sheaf is seldom placed after the 7676 weekly Sabbath within the Passover week. We've already addressed this part in this first part of our study. Number 2, Abib 16 wave sheaf activities are going to conflict with the resurrection account. We're going to show you 5 different examples. I'm calling them calendar conflicts just shortly. And number 3, The Omer count is disrupted when Abib 16 is the designated date for the wave sheaf or first fruit placement. We're going to look at that in a third category. So there are some problems that come up when wave sheaf is not placed exactly where it needs to be. The importance of wave sheaf following the weekly Sabbath is something that a lot of people haven't thought about it, but we're going to show you a little bit of extra of what actually happens when it does not get placed properly. Always remember that Sabbath is a celebration of the resurrection day. That was the day that Yahusha actually resurrected. And then the day after is the celebration of when he actually waved the sheaf. It is a type and an antitype from Exodus. So we're going to look at 5 examples. They're going to be calendar examples, and I'm calling it category 2 to see what the challenges are with the wave sheaf when you place it on Abib 16 every single time. We're just going to go through this a little bit slower so that you can kind of see what's happening. We'll try to explain it to you as we go. In conflict number 1, we are going to be looking at a Sunday Passover, okay, because Passover does land on a first day of the week, okay, and we're going to be looking at a Tuesday wave sheaf. This is Abib 16, okay? I have a question mark here because we know that Joshua never ever has wave sheaf on a Tuesday. And the resurrection is always observed on the Sabbath. So from a Passover on a Sunday all the way to Sabbath, where we would actually observe the resurrection, guess what happened? We went past the wave sheaf. This wave sheaf is actually representing the Ascension. And here, look what happens in this calendar. The Ascension is to be celebrated before the resurrection. No one will know the wave sheaf is to be really occurring on the first cycle if they're doing this. But this is the question of many feast camps that you can ask. Is wave sheaf is celebrating the first fruits ascension. So why are you celebrating it before you would remember his resurrection? Well, let's look at covenant calendar. In the same situation where Passover is actually on the first day of the week, okay, this is a covenant calendar example. We go all the way to the Sabbath, and that's where you remember the resurrection, okay? And the very day after that is the wave sheaf. That is where the ascension happened. So on a covenant calendar, when Sunday is on the Passover is on a Sunday, that very first cycle of wave sheaf ascension is celebrated the very next week, according to the Torah statutes. So you can see what happens on covenant calendar. The ascension follows the remembrance of the resurrection. Well, let's look at conflict number 2. Let's use Moses' example when he left Egypt. That was on a Tuesday cycle or a third cycle of the week. So we're looking at a Tuesday Passover right here. And we're looking at a Thursday wave sheaf. Why? Because there's many say that wave sheaf is married to Abib 16. And what happens when you use a Passover on a Tuesday? Well, you get to Sabbath and we want to remember the resurrection. But look what happened here. On Abib 16 is where the wave sheaf is placed, but it's well before the remembrance of the resurrection. So again, in this calendar where Tuesday is a Passover, Abib 16 fails to prophesy the day of Yahusha's actual wave sheaf offering. It just simply can't do it. Well, let's look at covenant calendar. Covenant calendar can have a Tuesday Passover, no problem. It happened in the year of Moses. And what were they supposed to remember? That on the Sabbath was the remembrance for the resurrection, and the day after would be the remembrance of the ascension, when the wave sheaf would get waved heavenward. So in a Tuesday Passover year, that first cycle of wave sheaf ascension is correctly celebrated after the weekly Sabbath, according to the Torah statutes. That is that weekly Sabbath that has the number 7676. This is conflict number 3. We're going to go through 5 of them, but this is number 3. This one is going to have a Friday Passover. And yes, indeed, we have found a Friday Passover in the scriptures because it does happen. It's a little bit under a couple of layers, but this is a Friday Passover. 15th is on Sabbath, and 16th is Wave Sheaf on the first day of the week. So Friday Passover, yes, we remember the resurrection on the 15th, and yes, the Ascension is celebrated after the resurrection. So this seems to work out pretty good. In a covenant calendar year where Passover is observed on Friday, Abib 16 is still going to follow that 7676 weekly Sabbath, and it is honored properly according to the Torah statute. However, on the other calendars, they cannot endorse that the scriptures are going to have a 4th cycle Yahusha Passover. So this represents, right here, this represents a false Friday crucifixion, calling it a crucifixion. It does happen in these lunar calendars where you will have Wave Sheaf on the 16th. It does happen, but it is actually on the same day, the right day of the week. They just don't know it, okay? Let's look at covenant calendar. You already know, I think we've done this sample already. We have Passover on the Friday. We remember the resurrection on the Sabbath. And then, of course, we remember the Wave Sheaf that follows the weekly Sabbath. There are no changes between this example and the one that was just given. However, to be sure to recognize that the 6th cycle Passover does not fulfill the requirements of Yahusha's messianic prophecy of 3 days and 3 nights before his weekly Sabbath resurrection. And we all know that there are some that believe in a Friday crucifixion, but it does not fulfill the requirements for Yahusha's Passover in the midst of the week. Well, let's look at this Passover on the midst of the week. And now what we have Friday as the Wave Sheaf on the 16th, right here. So if you take your Passover and you go to your weekly Sabbath where you want to remember your resurrection, well, what happened? This is really serious. This is Yahusha's Passion Week. Notice how serious this is when Wave Sheaf is placed on Abib 16. How in the world can Abib 16 Ascension ever be celebrated before any resurrection? How can you remember to celebrate it here before he really doesn't resurrect on a Sabbath? As far as I'm concerned, and Tim too, this is a serious impossibility. It's very serious. So Wave Sheaf has to have the right placement. And you all know that on covenant calendar, when we have Passover on a Wednesday, we're going to go all the way to that Sabbath and remember the resurrection. We're going to bypass the Abib 16. We know it means nothing on this calendar except for it is an unleavened bread day of the week, okay? And the resurrection goes right the next day. We're going to celebrate the Ascension right after the resurrection. Remember, it's just like we're supposed to do. So Yahusha's midweek Passover is followed by 3 days and 3 nights. And then it's his Ascension on the 1st cycle Wave Sheaf celebration. And everything else about Abib 16 pales in comparison, and it removes the backbone. It's going to remove the backbone of this very beautiful celebration of Wave Sheaf. Only in number 4 for covenant calendar is where you're going to find that all the details of the statutes are perfectly followed. There's not going to be any problems whatsoever. So this is just a little partial view going back to the Enoch slide that we have looked at, where they talk about their feast days and their Sabbaths and how they all land on those certain dates every single year. The evidence here lists dates for Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits. You can see that. They have Passover on the 14th, and they have their unleavened bread on the 15th to the 21st. And there they have their first fruits on the 26th. And just a side note, I want you to think about this. If the manna ends on the 16th, of the month, and they're not allowed to touch any grain of the land, old or new, until after the waving of the first fruits, what in the world are they going to be eating till Abib 26? It's quite a long time to fast. So there is nothing in this calendar to indicate the proper resurrection timing according to the covenant calendar statutes. And what did we say? If there's one thing wrong, well, there's probably a couple of other things that are wrong. Now, I just want to show you this quote. It is a quote taken from the website Enoch and History, 33 AD. And not that I agree with everything in this quote. There's quite a few things that are incorrect, and we're not going to read it all. But I do want to point out a couple of facts, because this is right from Enoch and History. This quote, it talks about 3 days and 3 nights, but there are several other problems also. And there is a chart to follow that's going to show why. So just let me go through a little bit here first. What it says in the red box is that he was in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. It's the sign of Jonah. I want you to remember right here that they're using Tuesday as a Passover every single year. So this quote is a little bit confusing until you see it on the chart. What they say is that the ending of the 14th day at twilight to the ending of the 3rd day or the 17th day at twilight, you got to do some math there. It says on Sabbath, the 18th, he went to testify to the ones that had gone before, that he had overcome. I'm just going to read part of that right now. But look what this part says. The 15th of the month, and they're using, Enoch uses sunrise. Most of them do. They don't use the dawn twilight. The 15th of the month at sunrise is the first day of the festival of unleavened bread. Okay. Remember, Joshua's year had wave sheaf and unleavened bread on the 15th. That part is correct. Then it says the 26th of the month is the wave sheaf offering, and it is the beginning of the Feast of Weeks. That's the count to Pentecost. And then you count 7 weeks and a day, and you land at Pentecost on the 15th day of the 3rd month. So there's a problem with that as well. But they are declaring that the 26th is actually the day of the wave sheaf. And of course, Pentecost has to count 50 days after that. Well, you know what? We really should take the time to chart what is happening with this Enoch evidence. And we'll just put this on the chart for a Tuesday Passover, because most of these calendars do declare that Passover is always on a Tuesday. We already know that Yahusha was on a Wednesday and Moses had a Tuesday Passover coming out of Egypt. But what they have here is a Tuesday Passover and an Abib 18 resurrection. Abib 18 is here, okay, according to their calendar. And there is a very huge counterfeit conflict. Very serious concerns with this Enoch calendar. And not to pick on Enoch, they just plain don't know. Somebody needs to tell them. But a Tuesday Passover has no alignment with the midst of the week, as is documented in Daniel 9:27. I'm not really sure how they ever missed that. But then look what happens. Resurrection is stretched. It is stretched all the way to Sabbath morning. So you have 1 day, 2 days, and 3 days. They have 3 days and 3 nights. They stretch it so that they can get to the dawn twilight of Sabbath for the resurrection. It's a very interesting concept. That's just what we read on the quote on the slide before. So then what happens? First fruits does not follow the weekly Sabbath in the Passover festival like we were taught by Moses and shown by Joshua. They have their wave sheaf bypassing the correct wave sheaf placement where it should have been, all the way up to Abib 26. Let's go to the next slide and chart this a little bit further. We're going to pick up. We had our 3 days and our 3 nights right here. Lots of concerns. And then what? Oh, we have a resurrection, but we have to wait and wait and wait and wait. This whole week has to pass by to arrive at the Ascension Day on Abib 26, because Enoch says it's Abib 26. Well, there are some serious concerns with this calendar. Abib 26 Wave Sheaf Ascension is on hold for a whole 8 days to pass by. And the question is, why, Enoch? Why do we have to put this wave sheaf on hold for so many days? And I did ask somebody that is observing this. It was actually a pastor. And he said, this is what he said to me. Oh, well, that's because Yahusha has to refrain from any human touch, so he's not contaminated, and his offering is absolutely pure before Abib 26. It had something to do with the red heifer cleansing. Okay. And I went, really? Is that so? Yahusha was unclean. I just couldn't quite understand that. Now, he didn't give me a reference for the book of Enoch where it says that, but that's what is said. That is what is taught. Where you find it, I don't know. I haven't taken the time to go and look. So that very first cycle of the week happens to be the correct day for a wave sheaf, but it's just not the correct date. Enoch is a whole week late for this antitype event. Well, who cares? You might say, who really cares? Well, Tim just told you the reason why on a whole bunch of slides. Because when Enoch does this, he actually removes the skeletal structure of your salvation and mine too. This is why this wave sheaf on Abib 26 is such a counterfeit. In fact, I don't know, it's just so bad to be waiting a whole week. I'm sorry, but we cannot agree. It absolutely is not a covenant from Yahuwah. As just illustrated, wave sheaf was never ever to be celebrated on a floating festival like we saw in those other calendar conflicts. Not on a floating festival every year, because it places the type ascension before the resurrection. You simply cannot honor an ascension before the resurrection. This wave sheaf yearly prophecy is absolutely amazing. Every wave sheaf festival, it was prophetic. Those whole 40 years in the wilderness when they couldn't celebrate it, but when they actually celebrated it, it was a prophecy. Yahusha was saying, or Yahuwah was saying, it's a prophecy because in 1500 years from now, that is going to be the exact day that I'm going to ascend for you. And he did fulfill it. He fulfilled it perfectly. And it was just after he talked to Miriam at the tomb. And remember, he said, don't touch me because I've got to go. I've got things to do. Well, you know what? As far as we're concerned, all of this is really good news about the wave sheaf. It's just so perfect the way it's laid out. Now, I know that you have seen this chart before, so let's just do a review because you're familiar with it now. We're talking about a day after the Abib 14 Passover. What happens? Well, we know it's always the first day of unleavened bread Sabbath. It's a high Sabbath. Every single calendar year, Abib 15 follows Abib 14. But there are some calendar years where you have Passover on the Sabbath, okay? And then you have to kick into what Joshua is telling you. And guess what? Wave sheaf always follows that day after the Sabbath. The morrow after the Sabbath is when the priest waves it. So there's two different statutes here. And what did we find out? That Joshua puts them all together. He rolls it all up into one bundle. He talks about the morrow after the Sabbath is going to be the wave sheaf. He talks about the morrow after is also Abib 15. We all know that. You just look at the calendar. So what happens here? He has shown you that wave sheaf actually gave permission to eat the grain of the land. And what happened in Joshua? Oh, it is so neat how he rolls both of these two wonderful statutes into one teaching. And he shows you that indeed, wave sheaf and unleavened bread came after the Shabbat, the weekly Shabbat. And I say that was a very good idea. I'm just wondering if Yahusha had it all planned this way because he has something special to teach us out of the book of Joshua. It's just absolutely so amazing. So the highlight of wave sheaf, absolutely. Every wave sheaf ceremony, it was a prophecy. And this is what it meant for 1,500 years, that the very moment of pre-sunrise light marks Yahuwah's skeletal bone structure plan for every single person. And then at that time, Yahusha, who is our wave sheaf, he is our first fruit. That's the time when he's going to completely fulfill every single requirement for the whole plan of salvation. And just like Tim said, on that day, on the self same day as when the prophecy was given. And that is when our death penalty was fully satisfied and recognized through Yahusha, the highest priest of the Melchizedek order. Does this information illustrate how and why the Wave Sheaf Festival is so important for us? I really hope it does. And I hope that if this is something new for you, that after this, Wave Sheaf is going to have a whole new meaning and you'll never, ever forget. Well, there's one more part to Joshua's Wave Sheaf teachings, and it's also a very interesting part. We're going to look at how shall the correct method for counting the Omer be determined? Because if you have wave sheaf wrong, you're going to get the count for Omer wrong as well. And another question, what is the tradition of how wave sheaf became married to Abib 16? How in the world did this ever happen? And we're going to see about that in the next part 3. So today, that's the end of part 2. And as always, we just want to say if there is any questions, you can always send them to questions@studythecalendar.com. And you can review the PowerPoint on the website.